Thank you very much. I think Igor made a disclaimer that his views have nothing to do with the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia and Federal Reserve System. More generally, I have to make a similar disclaimer that I'm being on the Council of the National Bank of Ukraine. Whatever I'm going to be talking here about has nothing to do with the official position of the regulator in Ukraine. Okay, so this is theory. This is a theoretical perspective on I'm just trying to understand what cryptocurrencies are and if this is something new or not, okay? And if it is new, what's the economic value of it is for the markets, and are there different risks there? Do they have different economic functions relative to the other examples of private currencies or even centrally minted currencies? And I'm not quite sure I'll offer any examples or any definitive answers, but I can offer some thoughts on this. Okay, so this is this morning I just took a screenshot of the 1 week price of Ethereum, or Ether in Russian, I think. So you see, I just want to point out the volatility. This week it grew. It doesn't have to grow. It doesn't grow every week. This is the second most capitalized cryptocurrency currently in the market. The first and perhaps the most known is Bitcoin. Is this safe to assume that majority of you have heard of Bitcoin? Okay, but not necessarily everyone, but I'll try to talk a little bit about what that is. But the bottom line is there is something you can buy. It's called Bitcoin or Ethereum or something else. How do you buy it? Well, I don't know. It depends on the country in which you are, and it depends on whether you are willing to break the laws. But let's say you don't want to break any laws, and you're like me in Ukraine. What can you do? You can go to a exchange, to a website, and in that website you can transfer money to that website using a credit card, and the credit card company will charge you 1% for transfer, so this is relatively small because it's Visa or MasterCard. Their fees are usually higher. And then you have hryvnias, Ukrainian currency, on that site, and you can go and make offers. You can buy or sell things which are called Bitcoin and Ethereum. You have no idea what those are, but you can buy them, okay, or sell them. And once you buy them, you basically say, well, I'm willing to sell Ethereum or buy Ethereum at this price, this many hryvnias for this many Ethereums, and that's like any exchange. And so you buy it, you pay 0.25% on that specific exchange, and it's in your account, and then you can withdraw. You can withdraw to an electronic wallet, which is essentially an address in the system, and then there's software which verifies that you have this many Ethereums or Bitcoins. You have no idea, I have no idea what it is, but I can buy it and then I can sell it. And okay, so basically this is, but the price varies wildly. You see, this week the lowest was 286 and the highest was 344, which is what is it, 45, 60 bucks, right? $60 variance on, let's say, an average of 300. So it's 20% of the value of the currency over 1 week. So it's volatile, it's ridiculously volatile. And this is 1 year. Oh, no, it's actually 3 years, sorry. It's from the 15th. Yeah, 15th, 16th, 17th, 2.5 years. And you see it grew from 0.43 to 300 something now. And the market capitalization is $31 billion. So even if it's a bubble, it's a substantive bubble, okay? And it looks like it's a bubble because it grew from half a dollar, yeah? It grew up like 400, 600, 700 times, right? Over 2.5 years. And that's not just one coin. You know, this is number of. There's Ethereum, Bitcoin, the two largest. Their market capitalization today, this morning I checked, is $100 billion, just two of them. So this presumably some value has been created, or someone is willing to pay these prices now for something, right? And then there's Bitcoin Cash, which is a variation of Bitcoin. Ripple and Litecoin are the next two. So you know how many there are of those today registered on this site? This morning I checked, it's over 1,000. Okay, 3,000. If you go, it may be total, but on the market capital, on the coin market capitalization on this specific site, I saw 1,000 listed, 1,056 listed this morning. Maybe there are 3,000 overall. That I totally believe that. Last week I checked, it was 850 listed, so they added 150 over a week listed to their site. So I don't know what's happening there. Okay, so but this is a Bitcoin chart over the last 4 years. It also went, basically, you see, market capitalization went from 0 billions to 70 billions over the last several years. And I have a friend, his name is David Brown, he's an IT person. He bought Bitcoin for $50 and then sold it at 300 because he thought it's a bubble. And he said that it went up 6 times, I must cash out. And it went up, it's at 4.5, 4.4 today, I think. This is cost of the transaction per volume. So actually, what is Bitcoin or Ethereum? This is a system. This is what's called blockchain, and many of you know that. And so on blockchain, you can, it's a bunch of computers, and it's software essentially. You can carry out certain transactions, okay? And for those transactions, you actually have to pay. You have to pay in this currency. Let's say you want to carry out a transaction let's say you want to do the following. An example of what I can do is, in Kyiv School of Economics, let's say I want to run a charity auction. I want to sell, let's say, a dinner with Nobel Prize winner to an audience of rich people. And the money raised in this way, I want to donate to the Kyiv School of Economics to finance education. So for that, I'm going to write an auction. It can be by hand auction, but I can also implement it using a Z3, let's say. Or I can implement it using Ethereum. To implement it using Ethereum, I'm actually going to download from the ethereum.org a code, which is relatively simple code. And I'll have to run it on my computer. And I will have to pay $4 in Ethereum. To run that code on the system, I'll have to pay in Ethereum. So I'll use my virtual currency to pay for the transaction on the system, and then everyone who I will give address of the auction to, everyone on your phones, I'll put a QR code here. You will be able to basically read it from your phone, and you will be able to participate in the auction. But in order to participate in the auction, you will actually not be able to make payments in dollars or Ukrainian hryvnias. You'll have to be making payments in local cryptocurrency on the system. Okay, so that's it. This is basically some system on which I can run software. That software can do different things. And, but in order for that software to be executed and recorded in the system as valid, and in order to make payments in that system, you'll have to use local currency. All right, so that's what it is. And how much does it cost? It's a 1% cost on average. If you see 0.8%. I don't know if it's high or low. Igor argued earlier today or yesterday that it's a high, and I agree with him. That's actually very costly. All right, so now, how many of you know, because it's sort of, I don't know if you are very familiar with blockchain technology or if you don't know anything about it. So on the side, between 0 and 100, what's your knowledge about how blockchain operates? 60? Thank you very much. And on average in the audience? 3, okay. So we have a very heterogeneous audience, so it's difficult to explain it, if I explain it in a precise manner, and if I explain it in a very simple manner, it's also perhaps doesn't do the justice. So let me try. A bunch of computers are connected to each other using software, which we call, let's say, blockchain. It's a technology. I issue my smart contract, a contract which says this is the auction. I want to run this auction, but before I can run this auction, I need to submit my auction, the code, the actual lines, how the rules of the auctions. I have to submit to the system. And the system will verify it. Verification means that it will record it in a certain way. Okay, as if there were a notary. Imagine a notary who is going to take a look at your contract, he's going to write down the rules of the contract and put it in the notary book, and then we'll put a stamp of that, certify it, and later when there is a dispute, you can go back to this notary's book and check that the rules of the contracts were this. So essentially, when I submit my rules of my auction to the system, I'm paying for verification and recording it in the system that everyone else in the future will be able to check whether I run the auction according to the true rules. It's a great simplification, but in some sense this is one of the economic functions which is important there. All right, so this is what's happening. Who is recording that? In order to record that, it is important that it cannot be fraudulently recorded. So if I use the analogy, which is a very unfair analogy, but if I use the analogy of notary, I don't want everyone to have a notary stamp. Because what will happen is I will go to a true notary and record a true contract, but later when there is a dispute, a fraudulent, a person who is trying to defraud me will bring another notary who he has just created. These things happen, in fact, when you have hostile takeovers or you're raiding, in environments like Ukraine, with sometimes unsecure property rights, you get guys come and take over your enterprises by paying notaries who are not fully, the good guys, and they change things in the books, right? And then you don't own the company anymore. And then you go to the court, and the court has difficult time figuring out who was the original, what's the original, because there are different conflicting versions of the contract. So something like that might happen here. And in order for that not to happen, it should be difficult to write down a contract to verify. So the system on purpose doesn't make it easy to verify things. In Bitcoin, I think it's on average every 10 minutes you can write down a block. In Ethereum, it's much faster, but still it's not easy. So you have to, from economic perspective, it's just a wasteful activity. You have to burn electricity by solving some difficult problem which you don't really need for anything. But if you're lucky and you solve it, you get the right to record a transaction. You become a notary with that specific transaction. So basically what you do, you write down the list of transactions that you want to verify, then you keep trying to do something which is very costly, and if you're successful, you can write it down to the system. So it's like burning costs, right? We know in economics, burning money sometimes is useful. Like costly signaling is useful because it helps us to signal credibly information to the markets. So the same is here. Recording transactions on blockchain must be costly because it prevents us from making it easy to defraud by confusing the system with different transactions in the future. So this is a distribution of the capacity to mine. Mining means recording these transactions. This is the computer power distribution in the market, the ability to solve those problems to record the transaction. The interesting thing is that majority of them are in China. That's for Bitcoin. And so the problem is that China has the... Yes, go ahead.
So my understanding is that there's a pool of transactions.
Yes.
So there's a pool of transactions that are waited to be recorded, and then everybody is trying to solve these puzzles
and record them.
Whose puzzle is solved the first is actually the first in the ledger. But how do we know that everybody is, there's the same number of people who are solving all of these puzzles?
So so this is, I think there could be people who are better informed in the audience than me. My understanding is also you have a choice which transactions to record from the system. And the agents who want their transactions to be recorded, they offer fees in cryptocurrency to those who record. So about 10%, I think, on Bitcoin system currently is earned not in just reward from the system for mining the block, but in the fees.
Because it can be built into software that I need to
Of course,
trust.
it can be built in, and there could be the interesting design questions from the economics perspective about how. So there is a paper I will refer later to by Lesno, who shows that in equilibrium, essentially, the Bitcoin system replicates VCG mechanism in terms of transaction fees. So people are bidding. I might have a transaction earlier, but I'm not willing to pay that much. So my fee is lower, and I'll be in a queue waiting until more people for whom the urgency is more important will get their transactions recorded faster. So these things are possible, and they're happening now at least. Okay, so this is the difficulty is adjusting to make this recording. As more people come in the system, difficulty of recording is adjusted so that the rate is kept constant. And this is evolution over time. Okay, hold on. This is miners' revenue, and I think it is calculated at the time of mining. So if they keep the Bitcoins or Ethereum over time and invest in that their remuneration will be higher. And this is the original white paper by Satoshi Nakamoto, and my understanding is that it's an unknown person or maybe not a real person, where he defines what Bitcoin is. And I just listed it because I want to put this as a definition. All right, so Bitcoin is actually defined as, in the original paper, as a chain of digital signatures, which you are signing over. This is a diagram from the original paper. Basically what happens, think of this as a check. Think of this as a check. An American check, paper check, where I issue a check, I write it to you, to person number one. Person number one then can write down the name of person number two and transfer the check to person number two. Person number two gets the check, endorses it by his signature, and then transfers it to the person number three. And it can go on and on and on. And every time, to verify that this is a correct transaction, what a bank would do, a bank would check the original signature that it is valid, and then we'll check the name of the next person, and then we'll check the signature of the next person, and we'll go on and on and on. So the name of the next person, it's like public key here. The signature of the next person, it's a private key, which later the system verifies that the transfer, signing over the transaction, was valid. So in some sense, the concept is not new at all. It's a check which can be signed over indefinitely. Perhaps the question is how the check is issued. It's not issued against your money in a bank. It's issued during mining. When you solve this problem, you get the right to initiate 5 new, well, right now I think it's 12.5 new Bitcoins. So that's new transactions. So in that sense, we talked with Igor about that. Bitcoin is just a memory device. It records transactions, okay, between different people. Okay. All right, so Bitcoin's in circulation. It's not obvious here, but the rate is gradually decreasing a little bit. But the total amount of Bitcoin, and that's puzzling a little bit for an economist. The total amount of Bitcoin is fixed at 21 million. And the reward for mining Bitcoins, for recording these transactions, is halved every 210,000 blocks records. So it's a very interesting and somehow unusual, mathematically elegant, but economically unclear supply rule. That every time you record a transaction, you get a certain amount of Bitcoins. That's an emission. That's a reward basically for recording transactions. The system generates money from the air for recording transactions. So it pays the reward. It gives you the reward for being a notary in the system. And everyone competes to be a successful notary. But the reward is falling over time. The hope is that it will be picked up both by the value of Bitcoin and also by the fees that people are willing to pay. But at the same time, it creates the problems of scalability, because if the transactions fees have to go up eventually, well, that makes it costly to transact on the system. All right. So this is the IMF perspective. This is just, I copy-pasted it from a recent paper by the IMF, where they compare Bitcoin as a generic cryptocurrency with money. So the question asked in that paper is whether virtual currency or cryptocurrencies is a currency, okay? From economics perspective, from technological perspectives, from legal perspectives. So let's briefly go over it. Does it have an intrinsic value? So, and it is compared, Bitcoin is compared to the US dollar and to euro from the perspective of the United States. So the US dollar is home currency. From that perspective, none of them has intrinsic value, okay? Dollar is not worth anything per se. It's not worth the paper on which it is printed. And so Bitcoin itself doesn't have any value. And so is euro. Claim to issuers. I'm not quite sure I understand what exactly you can claim with respect to the Treasury or to the Fed in the United States. So that perhaps is my ignorance. But apparently the IMF considers that there is some claims you can make legally in US dollars, but you cannot make them in Bitcoins. Okay, fine. But I don't understand that, and I'm sure I agree. Legal tender. It's not used as a legal tender in the United States. That is correct. From the perspective of the United States, it is not a legal tender. And so is euro. Euro is not a legal tender. But the United States dollar is, right? At the same time, from the perspective of the Bitcoin blockchain, Bitcoin is the legal tender. You have to pay in Bitcoin on Bitcoin chain. You cannot pay there in US dollars. So if you now take away the political or geographical restrictions and think of both Bitcoin and United States dollar as currencies in certain economies, then each of them respectively is legal tender in the respective economy. You cannot force me to accept the United States dollar in Ukraine, even though I can choose to accept it, but it's not a legal tender in the Ukrainian economy. It is only in the United States. I can choose to use it, but so I can choose to use Bitcoin. 2 days ago, I offered to pay my sister, back my debt in Bitcoins. She refused. She didn't think I was serious. But it's cheaper for me to buy Bitcoin in terms of transaction fees and pay her back than to US dollars in Ukraine now. Okay, so used as a medium of exchange. Yes, in the United States, limited in the United States. And it's not clear what's easier to use in the United States today, Bitcoin or euros. And I would make an argument that it's actually you are more likely to be able to get people accept Bitcoin than euros in the United States. Okay? At least in certain areas. In Pittsburgh, where I teach, I can buy food and groceries for Bitcoin today. There are several groceries which buy that, which sell. But again, whether it's gonna persist like that, it's unclear, because in Ukraine there are coffee shops which used to accept Bitcoins and they don't accept them anymore. It's not worth the effort. All right, used as a unit of account? No, I don't think so. In the US dollars, yes. Used as store of value? Yes, subject Bitcoin, yes, subject to very high exchange rate risk and sudden confidence shocks. And the other currencies are subject to inflation risk. And I think this is what advocates or activists of cryptocurrencies are arguing, that we have solved inflation risk. Well, that's not clear, by the way, from the monetary policy perspective, whether that risk has been solved, because it depends on a number of factors, not on just emission rule. But also there are other risks. Okay, now supply structure. That's the perhaps most interesting difference, that monopoly or decentralized. United States dollars is monopoly, here it's decentralized. Supply source is private, supply quantity inflexible. United States dollars is flexible. Not clear it's a good idea or bad idea. Maybe it's good that in an economy we have a flexible supply to absorb the shocks. And there will be shocks to the virtual economy of Bitcoin if it picks up. Supply rule, computer program rule-based. Some discretion is necessary. We know that from the monetary policy. So supply rule change can be possible and cost of production is high. So far, these are the differences. Macro-financial stability risks. Risk of hyperinflation, no. In Bitcoin, risk of long-term hyperdeflation, yes, because the supply is limited. Base money quantity changes to temporary shocks, no. in Bitcoin, and that's potentially is a problem once it is connected to real economy and receives shocks from real economy? And can the issuer be the lender of last resort with outside money in Bitcoin? Its answer is no. And again, this could be a problem if the Bitcoin economy actually picks up and becomes substantive, okay? So it's not clear the fundamentals are great, but it's being adopted. So this is a graph over years of number from September 16th to August 17th, about a year, right? The number of blockchain wallet users. That's the number of accounts of people who are using. I have like 15 of them. So, you know, it's not the individual people necessarily. But you see it doubled over a year. All right, so the questions which are interesting to me as an economist are this. What is it? Okay. Economically speaking, is it a currency? Is it an asset? Is it just a, you know, MMM of sorts? What's its fundamental value, if there is one? You know, how can I have a valuation model for that? And what its economics value? Okay. And what are the risks and how to regulate these risks? So this is the type of questions I would like to understand. You know what? This is the Imf response. So they think that they define virtual currencies or cryptocurrencies as a digital representation of value. I'm not sure what value Bitcoin represents, okay? I disagree with this definition because it's just a chain of transactions. Definitely it's an equilibrium construction, an economic equilibrium in an economy in virtual, but I don't think they represent any value per se. So I'm not sure I buy that. Now, here's a paper by two economists. They're quite knowledgeable, in fact, in the technological part, and they argue about the cross-economy risk, real versus virtual economy risks. They worry about new types of fraud and a bunch of scalability issues and other issues. There are definitely those risks, but again, I don't think these are the fundamental economic issues here. Here's a recent paper by a bunch of good guys, actually. I know Jacob personally, and he has done serious work on matching platforms. So their argument is this is just another matching platform, like eBay, Amazon, or something. It's a new technology, and there's nothing else. You know, you're queuing in order to benefit from this technology. You're paying fees, and that's it. And the only difference is decentralized. So if you talk about eBay, eBay sets up pricing rules in a centralized manner, so it's a monopoly, so there's deadweight loss, but then there are some other, you maintain the value in the long run better. Whereas here it's a decentralized system, so according to specific rules, this is basically a platform. There's less of deadweight loss relative to the standard rules, standard platforms, but at the same time there are some additional issues. Go ahead.
To the currency.
Yeah, so this is, there are two types of perspectives which are essentially the same problem and people look from different sides. Some people say blockchain is the key, and this is what the central bank governor in Ukraine would say. I had a conversation with him 2 or 3 days ago about this. Says blockchain is fantastic, and then cryptocurrency is just one of the applications. And that perspective actually says that we need cryptocurrency as a medium of exchange for a broader economy, okay? But this is not my perspective. But anyway, the alternative is, let's talk about cryptocurrencies per se. Start looking at this. This is about cryptocurrencies, and blockchain is somewhere in background. But really, here's your technology, here's cryptocurrency used on this technology, and people look from different sides. Whatever is closer to them, they tend to emphasize that. Okay, perhaps. But basically, I want to say that they are not so separate. They are important. So here's my view on this, on what's happening. There is a disruption here. There is an innovation. And innovation is interesting, and this is how I would like to think about it. It's actually a quite standard way of thinking about an innovation, but you have an innovation, blockchain technology. What it does, it gives you commitment technology. You can commit that your contract or your transactions will not be modified easily. And you can do it at a relatively low cost. So, the thing that let's say, central bank, because of political reasons, will pump money into the economy, violating inflation rule, or someone will change the ownership of a company, this risk can be removed here at a relatively low cost. I mean, they cannot be perfectly removed. Hacking is possible, fraud is possible, but it becomes much costlier. It's a relative issues, right? So you basically have commitment. Furthermore, it's decentralized commitment by the system. That's why it's inefficient, because everyone has a copy of the system. But at the same time, that's why it's difficult to forge things. Okay? All right. And, thank you. And I think, in fact, what's happening is that this commitment technology is used to set up a system of incentives to adopt the new technology. And we call that system of incentives cryptocurrency. All right? So I don't consider a cryptocurrency to be some kind of medium of exchange or a currency which is relevant for the general economy. It will be by means, but I think really what's happening is, once you have a new technology, you need to force people to adopt this new technology. And we always have had difficulties doing that for commitment problems, because I can issue you loyalty points, but then as an airline, I can deflate these loyalty points. I can commit that Ukrainian hryvnia with respect to the dollar will grow in a certain way, but then for political reasons, I will renege. I can issue you stock in my company so you can enter, but then I can undermine your minority rights. And of course, you can argue in courts, but courts are costly. And I think what blockchain does, and what cryptocurrency actually does, is creates a system of incentives of adopting this technology, and it actually is more effective because there is a commitment by itself. So commitment technology is used twice. It's used first as the value of technology itself, and second, you actually commit to the way you provide incentives to adopt your technology. And here's a simple example, I think. So you have two individuals and two periods, today and tomorrow. And I abstract from this, a platform, you need two people to trade. Basically, there is a technology, you can use it, it gives you value, okay? In period 1, only one individual knows of new technology. The second individual has not yet learned that technology exists. In period 2, the second individual becomes aware of the technology. So think of Poisson process, just two periods model. He arrives with probability lambda in the second period. I assumed already someone arrived in the first period. He arrives with probability lambda in the second period, and you basically want both of them adopt the technology, okay? All right. So here's outside option is normalized to 0. There is a cost of adoption. You need to figure out all this technology, all these wallets, how it works, how to translate, where is fraud, where is not, so it's costly. And the period utility from adopting, once you adopted it, you get a private value U, just intrinsic value from operating on the system. And then you have an externality V. This externality is positive. Here, the externality is high if both individuals use the technology in the second period. Otherwise, it's 0. Sorry, I messed up U and V. But basically, you have private value, which is good, it's fixed. And then you have externality, which depends. If two people use it, a lot of people use it, then you get a positive externality. Okay, so I make some assumptions, which imply the following. Both individuals are happy to adopt it in the second period if they expect the other one to adopt. So in the second period, if both are adopted, I'm happy to adopt it. But only one adopts, I don't want to adopt. And I also assume that the first individual per se is not willing to adopt in the first period. It's too costly to adopt in the first period. Okay? This is the assumptions I'm making. So, in this simple example, there are multiple equilibria with or without adoption in the second period. But no one adopts in the first period, it's just too costly. But in the second period, there are standard multiplicity of adoption of technology. Either everyone runs on this blockchain and adopts it, or someone runs on that blockchain and adopts it. Like we had with Microsoft and Apple, or something like that. This is standard examples. So in all equilibria, no adoption in the first period. Now I'm going to introduce an asset. And I am going to commit to limit its total supply over periods to 1 unit. I'm going to do like 2 slides. Yeah. And the value of the asset is going to be provided by the technology, what I call legal tender. I will force everyone who operates the technology to pay a fee. And in that way, in the second period, because in order to operate the technology and get your private benefit, you will have to use this asset. Because you cannot get any utility without using asset. Therefore, the asset will be valuable for people in the second period. So I basically tax the economy by forcing everyone to pay using the cryptocurrency or this asset for transaction in the second period. All right, so essentially what I'm committing that the asset will pay delta units of utility in the last period by taxing the economy using the technology, and I commit not to issue more than one asset total. And this is what I can do in decentralized manner in this way. So now I can further allow the technology to determine the amount of asset I will be allocating for free to the early adopter. So this is this mining, the early miners who enter in this system and create capacity to participate in the system. I'm going to issue them more tokens, 25, 50 early Bitcoins, now only 12.5, in the future 1/2 of that, and 1/2 of that, and 1/2 of that. So I want to have an equilibrium in which I actually give people who adopt the technology and participate in the market, every period who participate in the market, I drop them money from the helicopter. But the amount of money I'm dropping per person is going to be decreasing each period. And in my two-period model, I just want to demonstrate that if M, the amount of money I give to the first person in the first period, is sufficiently high, in particular more than 1/2, then there exists an equilibrium in which the technology is adopted in the first period. So I can, basically pay in this system. Very simple argument. And then the equilibrium will be made unique if I have sufficient surplus in the economy that it is actually efficient to adopt it. All right, and so that's it. And what's new in this, not much actually, just a very low technology, very low cost technology of commitment to end taxation rule. And I use cryptocurrency to force everyone in my economy to use it and pay people. And of course, then the value is growing over time because these are rents which early adopters receive. Thank you very much.